Well, I feel like it's almost like the history of how the U.S. and Europe treated Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union is almost coming at a full circle. So it's just
Yeah.
weird. It's odd that policymakers in Washington couldn't learn from the lessons of history by not repeating the same mistakes. You know, and what am I referring to here, Scott? I'm referring to now because I'm seeing a trend. I was in Poland and I was asking people. What I'm noticing is that now we are propping up the Polish military. The Germans are already not happy about it because the Germans wants to remain. See what I'm getting at, Scott, right?
Mhm.
And what I found out is that who's behind the policy is none other than the son of Brzezinski, who is the current ambassador, U.S. ambassador in Poland, Mark Brzezinski. I know. That's what I was like, wait a minute. Haven't we learned from the mistakes that if we would have back then in the early 70s, if we would have had a conversation with the Soviet Union, things would have turned out different. And now it seems we are embarking on the same path by equipping now the Poles, which means we're going to sacrifice them first. Where this is going to go, where it's going, in your opinion?
Well, it's unsustainable is where it's going. I mean, the bottom line is, for instance, the Poles right now are talking about building this massive army.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to spend hundreds of billions of euros to build this massive army. I don't know if they can afford it, and it just seems odd that they're talking about building an army while Europe is failing to equip the Ukrainians. And I would just advise the Poles also to look at the battlefield and understand that there before the grace of God go you, because if there is a conventional war between Poland and Russia, Poland will lose everything that they're building up. Buying tanks does not a armored fist make.
Yeah.
As you know, in the military, you have to train, 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 train. And that training has to be attached to a doctrine. And that doctrine has to be attached to a system that produces professional warriors, not soldiers, warriors, people with a certain mentality, a mentality that has them prepared to absorb the lessons they're given and then execute these in a very efficient manner on a battlefield. Ukraine doesn't have, or Poland doesn't have a professional military force. It's largely conscript driven. You can't fight modern combined arms warfare with a conscript army because, as I told you, most conscriptions last 1 or 2 years. It took me 2.5 years to master combined arms warfare, and that's with training levels that can't be achieved today. So you're talking about a minimum 5 years of constant training of a professional military force before they're able to begin to carry out the complex operations that are attached to maneuver warfare, to combined arms warfare. The Poles aren't there. They're a paper army, just like Stoltenberg's 300,000 rapid deployment force is a paper army. And the other thing is the expense of this. I don't know how Poland thinks they're going to afford this. This is going to be extraordinarily expensive. It's one thing, I learned this the hard way, and many of my friends have too. I bought a Saab, and my friends buy Jaguars. And we're like, great cars. But everybody warned me. They said, hey, can you afford that? I said, well, I've saved up. No, we don't mean buying it. Can you afford to maintain it?
Maintain it.
Because the moment you start driving it, what Saabs tend to do is break. They break often. And when a Saab breaks, it's very expensive to maintain it. You have to take it to a Saab dealership. You can't just take it to Joe's garage around the corner. You got to take it to a Saab dealership, which automatically comes with a premium. And then they got to do Saab stuff to it because it's just a different system. And next thing you know, you're fanning out money, giving it away, going, well, there goes my vacation because I just repaired the Saab. Then it breaks again. There goes my steak dinner because I just paid for the Saab. And next thing you know, your entire life revolves around maintaining this vehicle. Poland's talking about creating this military. They're going to put a lot of money down to build it, but what they're forgetting is the sustainability costs to make it effective. Because if you can't sustain it, Then you get the German effect. The German effect is to have an army on paper that looks pretty good, but because you've kept it in the barracks and you haven't exercised it, it doesn't exist anymore. That's the reality of the Bundeswehr. It doesn't exist anymore. They're barracks queens. They can't get out of the barracks. Their equipment doesn't work. It hasn't been maintained. They take the battalion of their modern tanks and they have to rotate the tanks to other battalions to get training. That's absurd. In the U.S. military, if I'm in 3rd Armored Battalion, United States Marine Corps, it doesn't exist anymore because we got rid of our tanks. But when it existed, we had our own tanks. We didn't have to go down and borrow the tanks from 1st Tank Battalion in Camp Pendleton. Say, hey guys, we borrow your tanks. We want to train up here. And then meanwhile, across the country, there's 2nd Armored Battalion. They're like, hey, when you guys are done, can we borrow those tanks? We need to train. No, everybody has their own tanks, not the Germans. All their stuff are hangar queens, haven't been done because they haven't been preparing for this, because you don't need tanks in Afghanistan. And so all the tanks stayed in the garages, weren't being maintained. Off go the Germans to do their thing in Afghanistan, and suddenly they're saying, we need tanks. We don't have the British. They gave 14 Challenger tanks to the Ukrainians. 14. That's a company. So, okay, that's it, 14. Sounds good if you're fighting a localized battle. I mean, if I had 14 tanks in my neighborhood, I could do some stuff. But now if I'm fighting the Battle of Albany County with 14 tanks, I ain't doing anything because 14 tanks doesn't cover a great deal of area. I'm going to get outmaneuvered, surrounded, and slaughtered. That's okay, but now the British only have 40 left. 40. That's it, the British Army, the thin red line. You know, the fabled British Army on the Rhine. There used to be a time when they had 90 to 100,000 personnel, highly trained. Back in West Germany. Even when they drew down, they could give us, a brigade. The 7th Armored Brigade fought in the Gulf War. They can't do that today. They don't have the ability. 40 tanks. 40 tanks. That's it. And we can go on. I can describe this situation for every military, including the American military. Understand there was a time when we didn't have any tanks left in Germany. I think around 2012, 2013, we got rid of the last tanks. And suddenly we said, we need tanks again. Well, it ain't that easy, because it used to be we had pre-positioned equipment there in a warehouse that was getting maintained. That's an important part of it. Remember, it's not just buying the equipment. You have to have people that come in and do the maintenance. They turn on the engine, they run the tank around, make sure everything functions, keep it up, because the way it's designed, pre-positioned, is if you need it, the troops fly in, marry up with the equipment, and go. That's the idea. It's not marry up with the equipment and repair it. It doesn't work that way. And so, but we got rid of all that. So now we're in the process of trying to rebuild that. But we send, as part of this Atlantic Resolve, I think it's called, we deploy it started with 1 heavy brigade. Now it's 2 heavy brigades that come over here. But what do they fall in on? There's no more a 21st Theater Logistics Support Command that used to exist back in the Cold War. Massive units with huge warehouses full of everything you need, so that when the brigade's out there and things break, when uniforms wear out, when ammunition, they can just bring it up there. They've got it. That doesn't exist anymore. And so these brigades are in Europe operating with zero sustainability, zero tail. America can't fight a sustained large-scale ground conflict in Europe. We can't do it. We're incapable of doing it. We will lose everybody in the span of weeks, if not months. That's just the reality of it. The Russians have been at war right now for over 500 days in Ukraine. This is large-scale war, hundreds of thousands of men, thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of artillery pieces. They have the sustainability factors. They're ready to fight this fight. Nobody in NATO is ready to fight this fight. And that's the thing that came out of the summit, that NATO is just a paper tiger.
I had a chance, Scott, to read, it was a released document from inside the Pentagon, just to go back to that point of Britain. and this was for the Pentagon consumption. It wasn't for to be, it was just leaked, basically. And in it, it was about the assessment for the British forces. And you know what it says? Basically, I'm paraphrasing here, that they won't be able to fight the Russians. They will run out of ammunition in one afternoon.
Yeah.
in
No, it's
one
true.
afternoon. And I thought it was like, whoa, for them to be this blunt about how weak the British. Yes, we're hearing them talking, yapping a lot, and
I
I
always
know it's not going to be.
always joke about the British and say that, and it's a true statement though.
Yeah,
Soccer is a big thing. They call it football in Europe.
football.
Football is a big thing in Europe. And they got these massive stadiums where their teams come and they fill them up with people.
Uh-huh.
You could take the entire British Army and put it into a soccer stadium in Europe and have 30 to 40,000 unsold seats. The British Army can't fill up a soccer stadium. That's just the
Ooh,
fact. Yeah.
it's a reality.
Unfortunately, we're gonna have to reschedule this to continue because I've got something at 2 o'clock.
Sure, Scott.
Gotta
Sure. We
go.
got a lot to cover. We got a lot to
Yeah.
cover. So I'll be reaching out to you, and I'm sure our viewers will love to have you here again. And I will reach out to you, Scott. We'll reschedule, say.
Okay. Well,
Well,
thanks.
guys, hope you find. I mean, I don't need to tell you much about Scott. You all know Scott. And by the way, I'm gonna be putting out the link to his articles that I read them on the Sputnik International. I'm gonna put it up for you guys to read, to educate yourself and learn a little bit about what's going on. So, Scott,
And
I can't thank you enough, man, for really carving out time for us here. And we
I
look
appreciate
forward
it. Yeah.
to
And
seeing
if
you.
people want to, if people want to read other things that I've written, you can go to scottritterextra.com, and
Yeah.
all my stuff is there.
Yeah. And
No paywall.
I'm gonna pull up your links on our for our viewers to go there and just check out all your content.
Okay.
Much appreciated, Scott. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Have a good
Well,
day. Aru.